I used to think real heartbreak sounded like screaming. Turns out, it sounds like the gentle click of a hard drive sinking in the background. Just a small hum. Then your whole life changes forever. My name's Aaliyah Smith. I'm 31 years old, and I work part-time as an elementary school librarian in Houston. And if you're listening, I'm speaking from a moment after the end. After the shock, after the break, after the collapse. I'm speaking from the quiet that comes after realizing the person who kissed your forehead in the morning was simultaneously planning a future that didn't include you. Before I continue, tell me this. If you discovered the truth silently in your hands, would you confront instantly, or would you collect proof and let it bury them on its own? Tonight, right now, I am sitting in my dim home office with only my desk lamp on, both palms flat on my wooden table. There is nothing dramatic happening physically. No glass shattering, no yelling, no slamming of doors. Just my breathing, my heartbeat, and the quiet digital blow of the laptop that accidentally revealed the truth that broke my reality open like wet paper. The evidence is sitting right in front of me in small digital fingerprints, receipts, timestamps, photos, metadata, ultrasound files. I haven't cried yet. I haven't screamed. I haven't even said his name out loud. His name is Lamar. And the woman is Vanessa, my closest friend. There's an old phrase we used to say in the library to the kids. Always check your sources. Funny how that line became my life's undoing. Because tonight, quite literally, I checked my sources. And what I found wasn't just infidelity. It was architectural deception, a fully furnished life built in parallel to mine, all while he told me he was planning a future with me. I am calm, I am steady, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I feel the kind of focus only betrayal can sharpen a person into. I am not going to break. I am going to analyze, because every lie has a paper trail, and he, unknowingly, just handed me mine. And this is where my story begins. In silence, in soft lamplight, with evidence sinking slowly into my hands. This is the moment I realized I wasn't living in a marriage. I was living in a cover story.
Here at Revenge Bible, we explore real psychological stories of betrayal and justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss our next emotional reckoning. Before all of this, before the receipts, before the quiet fury, before the cold precision, my life looked ordinary, pleasant, unremarkable, comfortably simple. I used to think that was a blessing. Our mornings, before everything shattered, were soft little rituals. I would wake up before Lamar because I loved the silence before the city roared awake. I would brew coffee, light a linen-scented candle on the kitchen counter, and sit for 10 minutes scrolling through simple recipe videos, things I wanted to try on slow Sundays, even though I rarely got around to cooking half of them. He would come out of the bedroom, hair still damp from a shower, shirt half-buttoned, always carrying that same cologne trail, cedar and citrus. I used to love that smell. It was the scent that held the idea of husband. I guess that's what is so cruel about memory. It preserves things you later wish it didn't. We lived in a townhouse on a quiet side street in Houston. 2 bedrooms, a small patio out back where I grew herbs in ceramic pots, and a little reading nook by the window that I claimed for myself when we first moved in. That was my safe place, my anchor. A worn armchair and a tiny bookshelf, my small sanctuary. I worked part-time at an elementary school library not too far from home, 2 buses away, or 15 minutes by car if Lamar dropped me on days where our schedules aligned. The school library smelled like glue sticks and new construction paper. The kids loved library day like it was a holiday. I was the soft-spoken lady who always smiled at them when they proudly returned their books, even if half of them came back with bent corners and mysterious sticky fingerprints. I didn't make much, but I never measured dignity in money. Lamar worked in tech. He was a solutions engineer for a mid-sized cloud company. Well-paid, well-respected, well-dressed. He spoke in confident bullet points, even at home. His calendar was always full, his phone was always buzzing. His life felt like forward motion, urgency, momentum. He liked when I made our home feel like a calm harbor he could come back to. I didn't know, back then, that a calm harbor can also be the perfect cover. Vanessa, my closest friend, entered my life years earlier. We met in college during a volunteer orientation. She wasn't quiet like me. She wasn't reserved. Vanessa moved through rooms like she expected to be seen. Confident, quick, charming. The kind of woman who laughed loudly and drank red wine like it was a language. And I admired that confidence in her. She and Lamar got along instantly. It felt natural back then. She came over often. She helped me choose paint colors when we first moved in. We joked about her being the unofficial aunt to the children we planned, someday, to have. And I believed that, with all my chest. Sometimes I think back to specific mundane moments, like the 3 of us eating takeout on the couch, watching a cooking show, laughing about how none of us could make a soufflé. And now those memories feel contaminated, like every frame is poisoned in hindsight. But at the time, life just felt normal.
We were the couple other people described as solid. We went to brunches, hosted board game nights with coworkers, and sent digital holiday cards with matching sweaters. I thought I was building a predictable, stable forever. A life that was quiet in a way that felt safe. I thought trust was a given, like oxygen, not something that had to be inspected. Our routines were sweet, predictable, almost script-like. He would text me when he arrived at work. She would send voice notes of random daily gossip. I would share cute pictures of students' art displays. Everything fit. It didn't occur to me until much later that predictability is exactly where people hide. There were tiny moments, barely noticeable, where a small flicker of doubt crossed my mind. A late meeting here, a canceled dinner there, a momentary shift in tone when Vanessa would mention certain weekends. But I dismissed those things, because loyal people expect loyalty. We assume good intentions because that is what we give. Sometimes I think about that, how the innocent tend to overtrust because they don't live from secrecy. Back then, I was a simplistic believer in people's stated truths. I never imagined constructing alternative narratives behind someone's actions. I wasn't built that way. Yet, if you asked me before that night what my life was made of, I would have said small joys, modest dreams, and the comfort of being loved by someone who respected me. And I wasn't lying. That was genuinely my worldview. Until one night, all of that innocence began to erode quietly, like a coastline being washed away, grain by grain. But that erosion belongs to the next chapter. For now, this is who I was.
a woman who loved her routines, a woman who trusted without question, a woman living in a peaceful home she believed was built on truth. That's the tragedy of the background. You don't know you're walking toward a cliff until your foot finds the air where solid ground used to be. Betrayal rarely announces itself like lightning. It arrives more like humidity, slowly, invisibly, until suddenly you're drenched. For me, the shift began with one small moment, one Wednesday night. We were folding laundry in silence. Not cold silence, just average silence. I remember I held one of his shirts, the pale blue one he wore to his presentation earlier that week, and as I lifted it to fold, I caught that familiar cedar citrus cologne. Except the scent wasn't the same. It was sharper, slightly floral, not the version he always used. I told myself his company might have changed their formula, that maybe it was a new batch, that maybe I was imagining it. Because the human brain always tries to protect the heart first. But then, tiny things began accumulating. He started coming home showered, not sweaty from his day. His phone began leaving the table with him, even to the bathroom. He would angle his screen slightly away in ways so subtle it felt impolite to notice. He would get quiet when certain names popped up, names that he swiped away before I could read. And yet, none of it was proof, just smoke. And I still believed there was no fire. Until the night Vanessa canceled on us last minute, after planning to come over for game night, because she wasn't feeling well. We were already halfway through setting out chips and drinks, her favorite chips, ones she specifically requested. She texted 2 minutes before she was supposed to arrive. My stomach tightened. But I told myself she was sick. It happens. Lamar looked neutral, almost too neutral, and he was oddly quick to start putting the snacks away, as if the night never existed. Later that week, Vanessa posted a throwback picture on her Instagram story, a photo from a beach vacation she took 3 years ago. It was meant to look casual, but the timestamp on the corner, barely visible, said otherwise. That was not a throwback at all. That was current. That same day, that exact day she said she was sick. And I stared at that story for a full few minutes, just absorbing it, feeling my breath grow still. She lied easily, comfortably. That was the first time my heart trembled. Not shattered, just trembled. But the moment it truly began to crack was the following week. Lamar had left his laptop open when he went to take a shower. Nothing suspicious. He always left his things out. But a small notification pinged. A calendar reminder window. Just a little pop-up titled Pediatric Consult, 9:30 a.m. Thursday. We didn't have a child. We weren't expecting a child. I remember my fingers froze over the mouse, like touching fire. I clicked the entry. It was linked to another Google Calendar, not our shared one, but another personal one he must have created. And there was another event in that same calendar from 2 weeks earlier. Ultrasound appointment. My heart beat so loudly, I could feel blood vibrating in my ears. Shock isn't loud. It's numb. It's like floating. He stepped out of the shower then, completely unaware, towel around his waist, humming. He looked calm, uncomplicated, human. It was surreal, looking at him, knowing he was living another storyline in parallel. I did not confront him. I did not gasp. I simply closed the laptop, quietly, and I placed it exactly where he left it. And I walked to the kitchen, and I washed a cup. And I told myself to breathe. Later that night, when he fell asleep, phone on silent, I stared at the ceiling, asking myself questions that burned like salt in a wound. Was I not enough? Was I boring? Did I not love him loudly enough? Was I too trusting? Was I too quiet? Did I make being deceived easy? I didn't know then that his betrayal had nothing to do with my value. But at that moment, I blamed myself first. I think that's the worst part. Sometimes the first knife in your back is the one you twist into yourself. The next day at school, while the kids returned books and chattered and laughed and pulled picture books from low shelves, I held their little library cards with steady hands. But inside, my chest felt hollow. I spent that entire day functioning like a body temporarily rented by a ghost, smiling mechanically, nodding politely, existing. That night, I asked him how his day was while we ate dinner. He said, "Long, draining, I'm exhausted." I said, "I understand." He said, "I'm going to sleep early." And then, without hesitation, he kissed my forehead. The same man who kissed Vanessa's life into existence kissed me goodbye for the night like I was a soft place to rest. That was the moment that broke me. Not the evidence, not the timestamp, not even the pediatric reminder. It was the forehead kiss. Because it was so casual, so gentle, so undisturbed by guilt. That kiss was the betrayal. That was the moment I realized I had not been loved. I had been used as cover, used for serenity, used for normalcy, used as a facade of his good man image. And I lay beside him quietly while he slept. My eyes open, my mind awake, my heart shattered. And in that hollow night, I promised myself this. I would not confront him with emotion. I would confront him with reality. And reality, unlike denial, leaves scars.
And reality, unlike denial, leaves scars. Discovery is not a flash. It is a slow illumination. It's like the hallway lights turning on one by one until you realized you've been standing in the dark the whole time. After that forehead kiss, I didn't sleep. He drifted off almost immediately, his breathing settling into that steady rhythm I used to find comforting. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, and in those hours, I transitioned from bleeding to observing. Because betrayal is emotional, but discovery is forensic. The next morning, after he left, I sat at my dining table with my journal open, not to write, but to steady my hands. I wasn't thinking like a wife anymore. I was thinking like a researcher. That was the first moment I realized I was not helpless. I was simply uninformed. And information was now my weapon. The first deliberate action I took was memorizing, not investigating, memorizing. His schedule, his routine, his habits. When does he silence his phone? Which days does he shower before leaving instead of after coming home? Which nights does he, quote unquote, work late versus actually work late? Because before you pull a thread, you must map the pattern. That week, I noticed something deeply subtle. He used different ringtones. Not different tones, different notification profiles. On Tuesdays and Fridays, his phone always stayed on D&D from 7 p.m. until sleep. But on Wednesdays, his phone vibrated more. Short bursts. Fast pings. Not messages. App notifications. But on Thursdays, silence again. Almost like a schedule of intimacy. Not romance. Logistics. Affair logistics.
My second step was technology. In libraries, we teach children that information leaves footprints. Every file, every photo, every piece of metadata, everything. He didn't know I knew that. So I waited until he left for work on a day where he had that 9:30 a.m. pediatrician appointment scheduled. I plugged his phone charger into his laptop, the cable he always used. And while it synced, I didn't do anything invasive. I didn't hack. I didn't break into passwords. I simply waited. Because Apple and Google sync things automatically when devices are connected. And then, like seeds rising to the surface, little new thumbnails appeared in the recent folder. 3 ultrasound scans, tiny grayscale bones, tiny vertebrae, tiny possibility. My stomach turned, but I did not cry. Then I did the simplest thing any librarian, any researcher, any quiet woman with a calm mind can do. I right-clicked, Get Info, and metadata opened with a location, Cedar Leaf Women's Health Center. I lifted a hand to my mouth not to gasp, but to keep my breath steady so I didn't fog up the screen. Because this was no longer suspicion. This was timestamp. This was location. This was evidence. And then there was one more field, something so quietly devastating, I almost laughed at the absurd delicacy of it. Shared to Vanessa Cole via airdrop. Not accidental, not random. He shared the ultrasound photos to her device. My sister, my confidant, my almost family. It was here that I learned something fundamental about betrayal. It doesn't destroy trust. It destroys the version of yourself who believed trust didn't need verification.
The next discovery was even quieter, but it was the one that changed my strategy. I opened his shared Google Drive work folder, and inside there was a folder that seemed mundane. Quarterly Reports Archive. Inside that, another nested folder, Q4 Backup Sorted. Inside that, another folder, Final Drafts, and then, inside that, a folder simply named Living Room. As if naming something domestic somehow made it invisible. Inside that folder were photos. Not explicit, not sexual, just ordinary. Vanessa, sitting on a couch, with a blanket that belonged to our home. Vanessa holding a bottle of prenatal vitamins. smiling subtly at whoever took the photo. And worst of all, a picture of her feet on our coffee table, resting casually next to one of our wedding photo frames, as if she belonged there. And in that moment, this was the realization that changed me irrevocably. They weren't cheating in secret places. They were rehearsing a life in mine. It was not an affair, it was succession. I was not competition. I was placeholder. That realization did not make me cry. It made me quiet. Dead quiet. Because when betrayal shifts from private sin to public replacement, the old self can no longer survive. That was the moment the wife version of me died and the strategist was born. And when strategists are born, they no longer ask why. They ask how. The last discovery was not technological. It was behavioral. After a week of observation, I noticed a strange change in Vanessa's communication pattern. She no longer sent me long voice notes. Instead, she texted statements, short, flat, neutral. Almost like someone trying to not leak tone. Someone trying not to risk emotional bleed. And then, the final tell. She stopped asking me how I was. Vanessa, the woman who would analyze every tiny feeling in my face, stopped noticing me. People can fake many things, but guilt always makes people avoid emotional checking, avoid asking questions that might trigger truth, avoid proximity to conscience. That silence from her was the real confession. Because the cruelest betrayals do not come from lying. They come from the sudden absence of care. And on that realization, I made peace with one truth. Discovery was complete. There were no more dots to connect. There was only a plan to build. Because once you have facts, vengeance is no longer emotional. It becomes architecture.
Plans are born in silence. And mine wasn't born out of rage. Rage burns too hot. It blinds. My plan was born in the softest emotional temperature imaginable. Clarity. Clarity is ice, not fire, and ice preserves evidence. The first rule I gave myself, the rule that anchored everything, was this: I would not confront either of them until the outcome was already mathematically inevitable. Because confrontation without leverage is just emotional venting. But confrontation with leverage is outcome. So I made a quiet vow. Every step would be paper. Every move would be documented. Every truth would be self-proving. If betrayal is an illusion of control, then revenge is simply a rebalancing of information. Step 1. Support. Not emotional support. Legal support. That week, I scheduled a lunch catch-up with my cousin Maya, who works as a paralegal in a small family law office. Not a lawyer, not flashy, but she sees divorce paperwork all day. I did not tell her anything yet, but I asked general questions. Casual. Hypothetical. What percentage of divorce cases end up using digital evidence? Is prenup nullification possible if fraud is proven?
What weight does pregnancy with another partner hold in settlement shifts? She gave me answers, not realizing they were not curiosity questions. They were blueprint questions. And before we left the cafe, she said something, casually, but it hit like a red stamp of confirmation. You'd be surprised how many marriages end because of Google Drive stupidity. I almost smiled because my foundation was already set.
Step 2. The accountant. A mother of one of our students, Jason, had mentioned months ago that her husband was a forensic accountant. They help with fraud, marriage asset tracing, quiet audits. I requested a meeting under the pretense of needing advice on personal financial literacy and understanding retirement accounts. His name was Leon. He had steel gray hair and the kind of face that looks like it's seen too many lies to ever be shocked again. I told him nothing personal, but I asked questions that only an accountant used to deception would understand. How are hidden deposits usually show up in bank records? What do travel expense anomalies look like? If someone had a secondary personal investment account, how might it surface in metadata? He didn't pry. He just gave me frameworks, systems. And then, casually, he said the sentence that became the center of my new spine. In the end, if you know the right places to look, numbers are incapable of lying. Numbers don't lie. People do. Step 3. Emotional recalibration. This may sound strange, but I stopped thinking like a hurt wife. I started thinking like a calm contractor hired to dismantle a structure. Because here is a secret most people don't know. When emotion leaves the room, power enters. So I stripped emotion out of my planning. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not replay moments. I did not imagine them together. I only thought in terms of sequence, leverage, evidence, timing. It felt like playing chess, except I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to remove their illusion that they were playing alone. Step 4. I started collecting, but not in a frantic way. Slowly, consistently, scientifically. Receipts, metadata, repeated calendar entries, timestamps, GPS data in EXIF files, backup logs, screenshots of their shared AirDrop history. I didn't store them on my laptop. I stored them in a personal encrypted drive, air-gapped, meaning it never connected to the internet. The librarian in me became the archivist of my own betrayal. And every file I saved was not saved from pain. It was saved for purpose. Step 5. Neutral performance. This one matters far more than people realize. I stopped reacting. I laughed at his jokes, like normal. I asked Vanessa how her week was, like normal. I cooked meals, like normal. I responded to texts, like normal. Because the worst mistake a betrayed person can make is leaking suspicion. Suspicion changes behavior. Changed behavior changes their guard. And if their guard goes up, your window closes. So I remained identical to who I'd always been. Soft, steady, trusting. Because good plans require enemy stillness. If I needed proof,
I would not spook them into hiding. If I needed inevitability, I would not give either of them warning.
Step 6. I determined my endgame. Revenge is not hurt them back. That's childish. Revenge is remove their illusion of invincibility without ever becoming what broke you. My endgame was not explosion. It was proof. Pure, cold, undeniable proof, presented at the end of a long, quiet corridor of normalcy. Proof that would have legal consequence, financial consequence, social consequence, emotional consequence, all at once. Not a fight, not a scene, but a revelation. And revelations destroy without contact. Step 7. Choose timing. Timing creates outcome. My perfect time would not be mid-argument. My perfect time would not be at night. My perfect moment would be in the daylight when people think the world is predictable. The day a person least expects their life to break is the day the lesson imprints. So I marked the date on my mental calendar. Her 3rd trimester ultrasound appointment. The one that was coming up in 5 weeks. A medical milestone where pregnancy becomes undeniable. A date that would convert speculation into existence. I would not destroy them then. I would complete the gathering then, because that would be my final ledger entry. And after that, I would not need anger. I would have truth. Truth doesn't fight. Truth simply stands. And the calmer I became, the straighter my spine felt. I was not planning destruction. I was planning justice. I wasn't writing a plot twist. I was restoring balance. And one quiet night, as I sat in my reading nook, surrounded by books, surrounded by the small comforts that used to mean home, I whispered to myself, I used to believe silence was safety. Now I know it is strategy. If you're drawn to stories where calm turns to power, stay with us. Subscribe to Revenge Home for more tales of justice served quietly.
Revenge, as I built it, looked nothing like a movie. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shattered plates, no slammed doors. There was only slow inevitability, a sequence of small, irreversible truths landing one by one until the structure they had built could not stand. The morning I began execution, I woke before anyone else. The house was the exact temperature I always liked, cool and quiet, and I brewed coffee in the same chipped mug. Ritual steadied me. I dressed in simple clothes that didn't draw attention. I wanted to be invisible that day, the way a shadow is invisible until you trip over it. Step 1 was distribution. I had spent weeks compiling everything into 3 packets: legal, financial, and social. Each packet held copies and originals. Redundancies were intentional. The legal packet contained screenshots of calendar entries and metadata prints from the ultrasound files. The financial packet had bank statements showing unexplained transfers and a ledger Leon had helped me format, highlighting inconsistencies in shared accounts. The social packet held images: Vanessa's feet on our coffee table, the prenatal vitamin photo, the airdrop receipt timestamp. Things that read like a polite, undeniable indictment. I printed everything on professional paper and bound each packet with a simple black clip. I put them in a neutral envelope and labeled them plainly, "For immediate review, confidential." Then I moved quietly through a chain. First, stop. Maya. I walked into the family law office with the surgical calm of someone delivering a file, not an accusation. Maya took one look at the folder and understood, not in the dramatic way people in films do, but in the practiced way of someone who has seen patterns repeat until they make sense. She scanned, nodded, and set a time, a consult that would begin the legal unraveling. She advised on next steps I already suspected: preserve evidence, issue no public statements, prepare for negotiation. Precision. Again. Next, Leon, the accountant. He met me at a small bank conference room and within an hour had generated an annotated ledger that flagged deposits, reimbursements, and transfers disguised as client payments. He explained the language of financial camouflage with a patient contempt. Small, regular deposits into an account under a maiden name, shared gift cards routed through third parties, the way home utility reimbursements could be misfiled as business expenses. He gave me copies to include in the financial packet and said quietly, "People think money is invisible. It's not. It just wears better shoes." Third, HR. Lamar's company had a basic employee support line for privacy concerns. I wrote a concise, factual letter, no melodrama, only dates, times, file names, and a request for document preservation. I submitted it under the guise of protecting shared assets in light of potential litigation. It triggered a chain I could not begin. Requests to preserve email logs, timestamps, and server backups. But it also created a record outside our home, which mattered. Then the quietest, most deliberate step: placement. I did not want to humiliate. I wanted inevitability. So I chose 3 audiences who together would remove their protective fog: the lawyer, the accountant, and my parents. The lawyer would formalize claims, the accountant would show concrete financial deviation, and my parents would be witness to the social fallout and protect the children in our extended family from being gaslit by Vanessa's future stories. Each envelope traveled separately that afternoon. The first real reaction came when Lamar called me while I was at the paralegal's office. His tone was casual. He asked about dinner. I answered neutrally, "We'll eat after." He mentioned a work crisis. I said, "Handle it." He had no idea the legal gears had started. He had no idea that the world he had crafted with soft kisses and plausible deniability had just received an institutional intake. 2 days later, with the artifacts placed, I scheduled my final observation. Vanessa's 3rd trimester ultrasound was coming up, the clinical moment I had anticipated. I did not go to the appointment. That would be melodrama. Instead, I stood in the kitchen of our home with an extra cup of coffee and waited for the small noises of their private ordinary: the kettle's whisper, the distant hum of a car, a laugh that should have been reclaimed. When the first calls came in from Maya and then from Leon, I could hear a change in the cadence of voices, a legal rhythm I had learned to expect. "We'll need to file a preservation order. We recommend notifying counsel. Hold all communications." Those phrases are antiseptic, clinical. They are the language of systems that strip romance into facts. The payoff unfolded not as a single explosion, but as a sequence of public unpeeling. First, a meeting at Lamar's company. HR called him in for a compliance interview after I filed the preservation notice. He answered questions under the company's neutral lights. They asked about calendar entries. They asked about shared drives. They asked about use of company equipment for personal backups. Every answer became another official record. Then, a quiet legal letter appeared on Vanessa's doorstep, not from me, but from Maya, with a tone that said simply, "We have evidence that affects your legal standing."
It was not an accusation posted on social media, it was a fact, presented with the force of procedure. What surprised me was not their initial panic. It was their small attempts to normalize it. Lamar offered plausible deniability. Vanessa tried to reinterpret photos as gifts and visits. They spoke like people trying to reroute history. But the documents did not care about rhetoric. The ultrasound metadata, the airdrop logs, the bank transfers, they did not bend to narrative. They read as truth in the way numbers do. The final poetic closure came when the local notary, because procedure requires mundane witnesses, certified copies of the files and sent them to relevant parties: counsel, HR, and our family mediator. It was not theatrical. It was a bureaucratic last breath. Signatures, timestamps, a stamp pressed into paper. In that moment, their fiction was replaced by an index. People expect revenge to be theatrical because they confuse pain with power. The power I wanted was quiet and irreversible. By the time the social consequences filtered through, muted messages from mutual friends, uncomfortable brunches, the sudden cooling from people who did not want to choose sides, I felt none of the guilty triumph I had imagined. I felt competence. I had restored a kind of moral ledger. Lamar and each reached out in the weeks that followed. Their voices had the same half-apologetic, half-self-preserving tone. They wanted negotiation. They wanted a way to rewrite the ledger into something smaller. I listened. I sat with Maya and Leon, and we chose terms that would protect my future: financial security, clear separation of accounts, and public neutrality policies that prevented the kind of personal narratives they'd used. When the agreements were drafted, I signed. Not because I forgave them, but because I had no interest in continuing as a participant in their story. I wanted to exit with dignity and evidence intact, not with theatrics. In the end, revenge was not a shout. It was the slow unmasking of a life built on soft lies. It was turning whispers into records, and then letting those records do the work my feelings could not. And when the last envelope left my hands, I realized the truth I had been aiming for all along. Proof is more devastating than passion.
I didn't wake up the first morning free. Freedom, I learned, is rarely sudden. It's gradual, like a dimmer slowly rising until you finally notice the room has changed color. There was no triumphant playlist, no dramatic haircut, just quiet mornings that didn't hurt anymore. I moved out of the house 2 months after the legal agreements were finalized. I chose a smaller apartment, not to downgrade, but to right-size my life. The walls were blank and honest. The rooms held no history. I bought my own furniture one piece at a time, intentionally, and I paid in cash. Clarity lives best in simplicity. I kept my job. I kept my routine. I kept my composure. I removed every emotional reflex that had been trained by gaslighting, apologizing automatically, softening truths for other people's comfort, making excuses for the kind of disrespect that disguised itself as complexity. Those reflexes were gone. I think a lot about the difference between dignity and drama. Drama screams. Dignity listens, then acts once, then leaves. I didn't block Lamar or Vanessa. I didn't need to. The silence between us became its own statement. There was nothing left to clarify. The record existed. The truth was sufficient. Sometimes friends ask whether I feel vindicated. The honest answer, not in the way they expect. Revenge
didn't fix anything. It restored symmetry. It gave weight back to my side of the scales, the side that had been hollowed by lies, rationalizations, hesitation, and those tiny manipulations that made me second-guess my own senses. The legal actions did not give me happiness. They gave me accuracy. And accuracy gave me peace. Now, on most mornings, I sit at my small kitchen table, the one I assembled myself, and write in my journal before the sun rises. 10 quiet minutes. Nothing dramatic. Just my own handwriting showing up for me. Unfiltered, uncorrupted, unchallenged. That is peace. And sometimes on days when clarity feels especially sharp, I think of that single sentence from earlier in this journey. That whisper I only recently admitted out loud. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking myself. And in the slow, methodical, deeply rational way this story unfolded, I found her. This was another story from Revenge Bible, where we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. Subscribe and join us for the next transformation.